This is my 2010 Seat Leon Cupra R, and if you own an older car like myself, then you'll know what it's like to constantly worry about issues that might go wrong with it. Such as one morning, maybe the engine won't start for some reason, or you're driving along the road one day and plumes of smoke are coming out the exhaust. Or in my case, for today's video, you move the car after you've had it parked for a few hours in that spot and you find that you've left a pool of oil on the ground below it. Now, this oil leak isn't actually coming from the engine, it's coming from the gearbox, and it's not coming from the drain plug in the gearbox either. It's actually coming from this strange bit on the side of the gearbox, which I was never aware of, but it's starting to seep oil out of it quite badly. So looking online, a replacement gearbox for my car, second hand, would cost about 150 quid, but also refurbished ones can cost about £500 and more. Now, to be honest, I hadn't exactly budgeted for a new gearbox this year. So before I go and try and fund the replacement gearbox by maybe selling the dishwasher in the house, that's a joke, by the way. Let's go and ask the knowledgeable guys on the Facebook group to see if they have any suggestions for this issue on my gearbox. And according to some of the guys on the Facebook group, it turns out there could be a fix for this issue. So it turns out that this area down here that you can see with the inspection window on the side of the arch liner, this is actually an area that you can remove a cap and you can pop these shims in. Now these shims are used if you have issues sometimes selecting first gear and they take up the slack that could be found in the gearbox behind that cap. So the cap on my one has just deteriorated and the corrosion has meant basically that oil is now seeping through the end of the cap. Now I've never had any issues when selecting first or any gears, to be honest, in my gearbox, but I was going to buy the shims along with the cap just in case there was any slack in there, and I might as well do it at the same time as having the cap off. So fingers crossed this £30 part can fix the issue. Let's make a start. So as always, when working under your car, always make sure you've got it supported with axle stands and a jack. Now, because I wasn't sure how much gearbox oil would come out when I took the cap off the side of the gearbox, I decided to use a drain plug instead and empty all the oil out. I made sure I had a bucket that was nice and clean and spotless so I could put the oil back in afterwards. And you can see by the colour it's pretty clean because I've changed it not long ago. Pop the plug back in, tighten it back up to the right spec, and then time to start on removing the cap from the side. So I used a wire brush to try and remove as much of the loose rust that was on the side of the Circlip as possible. Then spraying some WD-40 on as well, and then I had these really crappy pliers to try and remove the Circlip. They were too small, too short to actually reach between the two holes. So I tried various methods, not having much luck at all. Hammering the end of a screwdriver, definitely not the way to attack this either. So what I did in the end was adapt my small pliers slightly to give this slight curved ends on them, and then I managed to get the Circlip out luckily. Again, using a wire brush to try and remove as much rust or dirt away from the surface as possible, and again spraying with WD-40. Now the new cap, I could tell that the centre was actually a hole behind this rubber cap, so I knew to try and get the old one off, I could use this hole to gain access behind it. I would not advise using the screwdriver itself to try and lever off the cap. Instead, using these pliers seemed to work a lot better, and I think I might have damaged this seal in behind when I was using the screwdriver, so that's why I'm saying don't use one. So again, cleaning up all the surfaces just to make sure there's no rust or dirt going back in here. I plugged the end as well, quick spray WD-40 yet again, and try and just clean up the screw for the Circlip would sit, and some pressurised air at the end just to remove as much as possible. Now if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, and if you're not subscribed yet, consider doing so because we've got a project car coming up very shortly on the channel, and also this how-to video on this one-off PS5 that I did for the Cupra. So I started then getting the Circlip cleaned up, so I tried to remove all the rust that was on it, all the corrosion, try and get it back to being as close to the standard thickness as possible. And then using some brake cleaner cleaned up the surface before then spraying it with this rust converter spray, which you can get on Amazon. I'll leave a link down below in the description. And this just stops the reaction of rust on the surface of it. As that was drying, I then went back to the side of the gearbox and I found that there was rust lying in this hole here. Went about getting it all out with a magnetic extension. And then finally a bit of rag on the end of the extension just to kind of wipe out the rest of it. Next up I checked to see if there wasn't any play in the gearbox shaft to see if there's any slack in it. Stick around to the end of the video to find out if there was and how many shims I had to put into the gearbox to take up that slack. So next up I oiled the cap to go back onto the side of the gearbox, make sure it's lubricated. Now make sure this goes on nice and square, so you want it to go on evenly around all the edges, keep tapping it on nice and evenly. If it does go squint at all, stop, take it back off and start again. I didn't do that, and you can see I'm using a wine bottle here to try and get it on straight. I'm also using the end of a socket, an extension. It just was not rectifying itself at all, so in the end I had to use a pick and pull it back out and try again. The cap was a bit distorted, so I had to flatten the cap a bit and then reapply it. So with some gentle persuasion around all the edges of the cap to get it all nice and square, it finally was in place. At which point I then used a pick to clear out the channel for the circlip to go back in, pop some copper grease in, and then after a few attempts try to get the clip back in, finally put it into place. I'm definitely purchasing a proper set of Circlip Pliers next. So with regards to the play on the shaft in the gearbox, there wasn't actually any, so rather than going in the gearbox, these shims are going in the spares box instead. So that's the car all back together now, apart from the under tray for the engine, which I've left on side for the next few days until I know for sure there's no more oil leaking out from the bottom of the gearbox. Hopefully you found this video useful, especially if you've got a Mark II Leon, and if you have, you might enjoy this video up here, where I go through common issues with the Mark II Leon. None are actually oil leaks, but also common modifications, upgrades, and the brands to look out for when you're doing your car up. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button, hit subscribe down below to catch more videos from the channel in future. I'm off now to clean up the various puddles of oil around my garage floor, so I'll catch you next time. Cheers. So fingers crossed this £30 part can fix this issue on the car. Let's get the car done.